All right, thanking God and praising him again for patience. Let's call Habakkuk chapter 2, How Long, part 2. As this time, the question, how long, seems to be asked by the nations with a little bit different perspective. This time with the confident expectation that the Chaldeans can only go on doing wrong for so long. Understanding that, the chapter starts off with Habakkuk settling into, as verse 1 is going to say, see what God will say to him and what he will answer concerning his complaint. At which point, I just want to go ahead and read what God is going to say about the Chaldeans, beginning in verse 2. And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not right up in him. It is not upright within him. But the righteous shall live by his faith. Moreover, wine is a traitor. My footnote says wealth is a traitor. An arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects as his own all peoples. Leading into the second section where he leads into a bunch of woes he's pronouncing over the Chaldeans. But the thing that caught my attention about section 2 is the fact that God, once again, is not gaslighting his man or his servant, Habakkuk, understanding that in life there are times when questions can get tough and we can be tempted to gloss over the truth of the answer. God here, however, is spending another chapter saying the Chaldeans are at least as bad as you think they are. However, that's the foundation for God basically making it clear through the woes that follow. Even though it's about to go bad for God's people, it's about to go even worse for the Chaldeans too. As the first woe comes in verse 6, where he says, woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. For how long? These woes taking the shape of a taunt that God says the people will eventually take up against Chaldea once the tables turn on Chaldea. I should have just read the beginning of verse 6 where it says, shall not all these take up their taunt against him with scoffing and riddles for him and say, as we mentioned, woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. For how long? As the nations seem to taunt. The next taunt coming in verse 9 where it says, woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. The next woe coming in verse 15 where it says, woe to him who makes his neighbor drink or makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk in order to gaze at their nakedness, not necessarily their physical nakedness, but the fact that they are exposed and vulnerable and seemingly powerless to stop the Chaldeans. I think that is the literal application that is going for it. Could be literal nakedness, but either way, the final woe comes in verse 19 where it says, woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Going back to verse 18, where it's going to ask the question, what profit is an idol? Understanding that going back to chapter 1, their own might was their God. The idols, in a lot of ways, might have been nothing more than an excuse to make up justifications for doing whatever they wanted just because they could get away with it. Either way, in the woes are not simply an identification with or of what's going on. They are identifying the wrongs that the Chaldeans are doing, introducing them to the remedy for each of those areas in which they had gotten comfortable doing dirt. When he says in verse 6, woe to them who heap up what is not theirs, he's going to say, just as they have plundered in verse 8, they are going to be plundered. Likewise, when they were given the woe in verse 9 for heaping up or getting evil gain, it's going to say all of the splendor of the things they accumulated are going to turn from glory to shame. And likewise, shame is going to seem to be the remedy for the woe in verse 15, where they were making their neighbors drink, possibly mocking them for their weakness and vulnerability. Once again, it was going to turn to the shame of the Chaldeans. And then likewise, finally, with the woe attached to the idols that simply gave them the justification to make up excuses to do whatever they had the power to do, it's going to raise the question, what good will those excuses and idols be when God finally brings a judgment they're powerless to stop? Reminding me why a woe I might have glossed over or might have just flat out left out was a woe that probably most caught my attention, beginning in verse 12, where it reads, "Woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity. Behold, is it not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire, and nations weary themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." Reminding me that the Chaldeans provide yet one more example of the way in which we may be able to win at the unnecessary expense of others, but to the degree our winning stands in the way of the life that God knows is possible for others, especially to the degree that, like the Chaldeans, our success comes through intimidation and force. God is letting Habakkuk know that it's only a matter of time before he personally steps in to bully the bullies. Something that will finally give Habakkuk reason to rejoice at what we call the salvation of the Lord in chapter 3.